Welcome to the Nourished Mumlife. This is episode 8, a conversation with Dr. Peter Brukner. Dr. Brukner is a medical doctor and specialist sports and exercise medicine physician. He is also the author of the best-selling book, A Fat Lot of Good. If you haven't heard of this man, do yourself a favour and look him up. For most of his career, Dr. Brukner recommended and lived on a low-fat, high-carb diet. That was until he was diagnosed with pre-diabetes and discovered he really wasn't in the best shape of his life. He openly shares his journey with us today and offers many insights into men's health and our own health. Full details of how to find Dr. Brukner can be found in the show notes. You're listening to the Nourished Mumlife Podcast by Tracey. This podcast is all about empowering mums to live a nourished life right now. So grab a coffee, sit back and relax. Dr. Brukner, for joining us on the podcast. You're our first male guest, so I'm really excited that it's you. Thank you so much.
Well, I feel honoured.
Now, believe it or not, there's probably a few people listening who haven't actually heard of who you are and what you do. So would you mind telling everyone a little bit about who you are?
Okay, well, my name is Peter Brukner. I'm a doctor, and more specifically, I'm a sports medicine physician. So I basically look after sporting injuries and athletes. And over the last, 30 or 40 years, I've worked in sports medicine at a sports medicine clinic here in Melbourne, Australia, and looked after a whole bunch of sporting teams over the years, from AFL teams to Olympic teams to Socceroos to I spent a couple of years in Liverpool in the English Premier League, and then most recently I had 5 years as the Australian cricket team doctor. So that finished up about 18 months ago, well before their recent indiscretion. So I take no responsibility for those. Clearly missing my moral guidance. But so that's really, my sort of first part of my life, I guess, is sports medicine. And then more recently, I've become more interested and involved in nutrition and lifestyle as a means of improving our health. Okay,
so what led you down that path?
Well, it was, like so many people, I guess it was my personal experience. So it all started, where are we now? About 7 years ago, 2012, I was living in Liverpool, and I just turned 60. And if you'd asked me if I was healthy, I'd have said, yeah, I'm pretty healthy. I eat well, I'm on a low-fat diet. I exercise regularly. My blood sugar's fine. I'm okay. The reality is that I probably wasn't quite as healthy as I thought I was. I was overweight, borderline obese, and like so many sort of men of my age, I think I just gradually put on weight. I probably put on an average of half a kilogram a year for 30 years, with the result that I was 15 kilograms overweight, and I was right on that borderline of overweight obesity on my BMI. And I also had high triglyceride levels, high insulin levels. I had a family history of type 2 diabetes. So my father had developed type 2 diabetes at exactly that age. So I was pretty determined not to go down that track, because that's not a very nice track to go down. And so I had some bloods done, and they weren't that great. As I said, my insulin was high, my triglycerides were high. And I'd had a condition called fatty liver for about 10 years that, like a typical doctor, I totally ignored and pretended it would just go away. And I didn't really understand what it meant, and I figured I was on a low-fat diet, and that'll be all right. So I just pushed that at the back of my mind, as we do. So I probably wasn't quite as healthy. Now, around that time, I have a good friend and colleague in South Africa called Tim Noakes, who I've been friends with for a long time. And Tim sort of, as always, he's a very well-known sports scientist, probably the best-known sports scientist in the world, the author of the Law of Running, which any serious runner has used as their Bible for the last 20 years. And Tim's had always been a big advocate of carbohydrates for fueling, for fueling exercise. And around this time, Tim sort of started to talk about the fact that he'd completely changed his mind, and that he'd developed health problems himself, type 2 diabetes and overweight. And he was feeling terrible and running terribly. And he'd experimented with a low-carb diet, and he'd had amazing results. And I read this and I thought, oh, this is, Tim's finally sort of lost the plot here. He's gone crazy. But because of who it was, I thought, I need to look into this. So I read a book called Good Calories, Bad Calories by a journalist called Gary Taubes. And I guess in retrospect, that was sort of the book that changed my life. It just blew me away. Because this book talked about not just sort of, whether carbs were good or fat was good and so on, but it talked about the sort of the politics of how we got down this, how the whole Western world basically had been experimenting with this low-fat diet. And I'd always assumed that there was, good logical scientific reasons for that. And it turns out that there was no science behind it at all. It was just all about politics and money and the US Agriculture Department and so on. And this sort of just blew me away. I mean, I remember putting the book down at night and thinking, no, this couldn't be true. We couldn't have had this wrong for the last 30 years. And I found it really disturbing. So then I started, I dived into, reading lots of books and articles. And the more I read and the more I looked at it, I thought, wow, this is, there's really something in this. So being a doctor and a scientist, I thought, well, it's time to do some science, some research. Now, I also knew that research with an N = 1 is probably a waste of time, except when the 1 is you, in which case, the N = becomes very important. So I decided it was time for an N = 1 experiment. So I got all my bloods done on day 1, and then I went on this basically low-carb sort of healthy fat diet. So I stopped eating sugars and all the sort of starchy carbohydrates, so rice and pasta and potatoes and bread. Stopped eating fruit juice. Stopped eating most fruits other than berries. And just went back to eating probably the way that my grandparents had been eating, really, just, lots of real food. So, meat and fish and veggies and back to dairy, instead of all this sort of low-fat dairy, I went back to full-fat, cream and milk and butter instead of margarine and really the way that, they used to eat before we sort of got into all this processed stuff. So I stopped eating all processed food, really. Anyway, so what happened? The first thing I noticed was that I stopped being hungry. So that was amazing. I mean, instead of, having my breakfast at 8 o'clock, eating my cereal or whatever, and then getting to about 11 o'clock and thinking, God, it must be lunchtime soon. I just stopped being hungry. I went from probably eating 3 meals and 3 snacks a day to eating 2 meals a day. And I'm still eating 2 meals a day now and just not hungry. So that was the first thing. And then the weight started to come off. Every week I just weigh myself and I just lose weight. And they always sort of say, oh, the first week is just fluid or, something. But, just every week I just lost weight. And then I started to feel better. I had more energy. I stopped feeling sleepy in the afternoon. I slept better. My exercise improved. I just felt, and I just felt mentally I was just much more alert and so on. So I did this for 3 months, for 13 weeks. At the end of it all, I finished up losing 13 kilograms in 13 weeks, despite never being hungry, eating really good food, enjoying every meal.
Eating fatty foods.
Eating fatty foods. The more fat I ate, the more fat I lost. It was just bizarre, and that was the hardest thing, in fact, just getting your head around the fact that, everything we've been told for 30 years was actually wrong, and it was okay to eat fat. But, so I just lost this weight basically so easily. I almost sort of felt guilty, I mean, it's not supposed to be this easy losing weight, so enjoyable. So, and my bloods all improved, my triglycerides came right down, my insulin went back to normal, and this fatty liver I'd had for 10 years completely disappeared. So every blood test for 10 years, with these liver enzymes that show up in fatty liver were very high. And at the end of this 3 months, absolutely low normal. It was just incredible. So look, in retrospect, I mean, I was clearly pre-diabetic. I had all those sort of abnormalities that were leading to diabetes. And I have no doubt that if I'd not changed things by now, I'd be a fully fledged diabetic, the same as my father and so on. I think I was able to dodge that bullet and avoid it. And I've stayed pretty much on that diet, probably not quite as strict as I was the first 3 months, but largely low carb and healthy, healthy real food. I eat virtually no processed food at all. And eat plenty of good healthy fats and stay pretty healthy. So it's been an amazing transformation for me. And I guess as a result, I just became very interested in the whole topic. I read everything I can get my hands on. I've started to sort of talk about it. And a couple of years ago, we started a campaign called Sugar by Half. The reason behind that campaign was basically, I just felt there was a lot of confusion out there among people that, they've been told for ages what to eat, and now there are all these different diets coming up, and no one, everyone pushing their particular diet, whether it be, low carb or, Atkins or paleo or Mediterranean, and everyone, trying to convince people that was the only possible diet, and if you don't eat that diet, you'll be dead, and so on. So, and I just felt that everyone was confused, that people were confused. Friends were coming up to me and saying, look, I'm just confused now about what I should be eating. So I thought, well, if we just drag it back to the lowest common denominator and focus on one thing, and the one thing that everyone agrees on, even the dietitians agree on, the fact that sugar is bad news. So we thought, well, why don't we just get all these different groups together? So I went around the country and talked to all the different, talked to Paleo Pete and talked to Sarah Wilson and all the different sort of people in the space. And everyone agreed, yeah, let's just, that's a good idea. Let's focus on sugar. So I always think a campaign should have a target. So we thought, well, let's try and reduce the amount of added sugar by a half. So the average Australian has about 14, 16 teaspoons of added sugar a day. The World Health Organisation, it's hard to believe, isn't it? The World Health Organisation says, probably no more than 6 is good for your health. So my maths was never great, but that's about half. And I figured, well, let's try and go with that. So we've been doing that campaign. It's been largely a social media campaign, but we're ramping that up this year and hoping to get a fully fledged campaign out there and get some community involvement and so on. And then everyone sort of kept saying to me, oh, you're going to write a book, you're going to write a book. And I said, no, I'm not going to write a book. There's 100, what the world doesn't need is another diet book, let's face it. But I got approached by publishers, by Penguin, and they sort of convinced me that there were no books out there by doctors and no books out there by Australian doctors, and that, a book might have quite an impact. So that's why I wrote the book, A Fat Lot of Good, which came out last year, and it's gone really well. It's in its 4th reprint or something like that, and people seem to find it, pretty easy to read and so on. But I'm a bit biased probably. I'm not a good judge, but it's going well, and and I'm getting a good response from that.
Absolutely. I mean, we've loved your book. My husband recommends it to a lot of his cousins, male cousins, because it's really easy to read. It's such a great manual, but we love it too because it's not just about food. It's a holistic approach to health. It's looking at sleep and, all the other lifestyle factors that do influence our health. And it's just so easy and common sense, and it explains everything so clearly. So yes, absolutely. I highly recommend Dr. Peter Brukner's book if you haven't read it.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah. Look, obviously, I mean, I focus a lot on nutrition, but as you say, nutrition is just, I think it's probably the most important, but it's certainly not the only factor, and exercise is important. Exercise is probably not as important as people think for losing weight, but it's really important for a whole lot of other issues. And I certainly strongly advise exercise, and sleep is really important. I think getting a good night's sleep is just so important. It makes you metabolically a lot more healthy. And the other important factor is stress. And they're all interrelated. I mean, you have a lot of stress in your life, you don't sleep well, you don't eat well, et cetera, et cetera. So, stress is really important. So, mindfulness and working on the stress is really a key. But I guess I'll focus largely on nutrition because that's the area that I know a little bit about, and but it's not to say it's the only thing. It's, as you say, it's the whole package.
That's right, and you certainly know a lot about exercise. So if I just asked you that question, it's something I'm a personal trainer, or I'm not now, I'm retired. I'm more into the health coaching now. But of course, every client that ever came to see me over the years came to see me to lose weight. So I always knew there was more to it because a lot of them didn't really get anywhere. Are you able to explain in layman's terms why exercise isn't as big as people think it is for weight loss?
But look, I think both men and women, if I heard it once, I heard it 100 times. You see the guy in the bar in the evening, guzzling away at his beers and his pizza and saying, "Oh, it's okay, I'm going for a run in the morning. I'll be able to run it off." And he'd have to run all day to run off his 10 beers and his large pizza. I mean, it just doesn't work like that. I mean, the amount of calories you use up, walking or jogging or swimming or whatever is minimal compared to the calories you take in from food. It, just from a purely calories in, calories out, which I don't totally believe in, but, it just doesn't make sense. So that's why, what you eat is more important. But look, having said that, there are a lot of benefits of exercise to health and to basically your metabolic health. But weight loss is not. I always sort of think probably for men, weight loss is about 80-20, sort of 80% diet, 20% exercise. It might be a little bit. Women might be sort of 70-30, 60-40. Women seem to get more benefit for weight loss from exercise than men do. But diet is the key. I mean, it's amazing if you go along to a marathon. Go and watch the runners go by. It's amazing how many of them are overweight. Now, if exercise was the key and you're training for marathons, you'd be fine. I mean, even quite, elite athletes who are doing huge amounts of exercise, often they're 2, 3, 4 kilograms overweight. And that's because of their poor diet. And it's basically because their diet has been carbohydrate based for the last 20 or 30 years. And that basically gets converted to fat. So you've got to reduce your carbohydrates. That's the key.
So what do you say then to people that call LCHF, which is low carb, healthy fat, a fad diet?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure really what the definition of fad is really. I mean, it tends to me, it's unusual, it's temporary and so on. I mean, what people can call it that if they like. I mean, to me, I don't even call it a diet because diet to me implies something sort of temporary and short term. I mean, to me, this is just a lifestyle. This is the way I've chosen to eat. This is the way I think to be healthy. This is the way you should eat. So it's a more of a way I eat or a lifestyle rather than a diet. I mean, I think fad diet is it's like it's an insulting sort of term in a way, isn't it? As people try to put it down. And okay, if fad means unusual or against the grain sort of thing, well, yeah. I mean, it is different. If we look at it, I mean, you've got to think. Okay, the last 30 or 40 years ago, the whole Western world sort of got told to stop eating fat. Okay, the dietary guidelines came out from the US and the food pyramid, and then Australia and everyone else. The whole Western world really adopted it, and we've been on this experiment really for 30 or 40 years. And as I said before, there was no basis for that. I mean, they've gone back, recently and looked at all the evidence that was available back in 1980 to make this decision, and there was none. It really was one guy, Ansel Keys, on the basis of some fraudulent research that convinced the US Agriculture Department, because obviously they benefited enormously from grains and corn and soy and everything, to bring in these guidelines. And so we were told to take the fat out of our diet, which we did. The problem was, the food industry realised that when you take the fat out of food, you take most of the flavour out, so they had to put something back in. And what do? They replace that with sugar. So really we've been on a low-fat, high-sugar diet for the last 30 or 40 years. And you've got to look and say, well, has that worked? Well, clearly not. I mean, we've just got fatter and sicker every year, to the point where 2/3 of Australian males are now overweight or obese, more than half our females, a quarter of our children. There's nearly 2 million diabetics in this country. The graph just gets worse and worse every year. And the amazing thing to me is if you're running a business and your results were getting worse, steadily worse every year for 30 or 40 years, wouldn't you at some stage in that 30 or 40 years say, hang on a minute, maybe we're doing something wrong. Maybe we should try something different. No, we just keep doing the same thing, low fat, low cholesterol, and it's been a disaster. Obviously, there's a lot of, vested interest in maintaining that. People have made a lot of money out of the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and so on, but it's not working. And we really need to ask the question, why isn't it working? And it's not working because it's been the wrong advice. The sooner we get to realise that and change, the better. And people have experiences like mine and the many other people who are getting it. I mean, there are plenty of people out there starting to do the right thing. It's unfortunately, the medical profession and the dietitian's profession are resisting it because they're reluctant to admit they were wrong. And it's not easy to admit you're wrong. I mean, I had to admit that I'd given the wrong advice for 30 years. It's not a very nice feeling. But you've got to look at the evidence, and the evidence is there. And we've been doing it wrong for a long time. And the sooner we change, the better. Because at the moment, it's just not sustainable. I mean, all these obesity, diabetes, all the chronic diseases, Alzheimer's and things like that. Gluten problems, things that we never heard of when I was a medical student. they're everywhere now. I mean, what's changed in the last 30 or 40 years? And people say, oh, we're not exercising as much. Well, that's not actually true. We exercise, the figures show we exercise around the same amount as we did 30 or 40 years ago. Probably in those days it was sort of work-related, and now it's more sort of leisure-related. But the activity levels are about the same. It's diet that's changed. And, we're eating so much more sugar and starches and vegetable oils and grains, and that's the basis of our diet now, instead of sort of meat and fish and dairy and eggs. And, I mean, eggs is a classic example. Been demonised for 30 or 40 years because, they're high in cholesterol. And yet we've known for that time, even Ansel Keys admitted 30, 40 years ago, that the cholesterol in the food you eat has no effect on the cholesterol in your blood. But that was enough to demonise eggs, egg white omelettes. Oh my God,
Disgusting.
They taste disgusting, and all the good stuff's in the yolk.
That's right.
So, eggs, the other one, butter and margarine. Butter, a natural, product with all sorts of, healthy things in it, being replaced by a chemical concoction. I wouldn't even call it a food. The vegetable oils started off as cleaning products, then someone realised if we, fiddle around with them enough and add enough things and put them through enough chemical processes, we might have something that looks a bit like food. And we had a whole generation stop eating butter and replace it with margarine.
I remember telling my mum, stop buying that butter, everything in margarine, everything low fat. When I made the switch about 5 years ago, so my husband and I have very similar health journey that you did, and we had to find an alternative because what we were doing wasn't working. But, when I made the switch back, my mum was like, see, I told you I fed you the right things when you were growing up.
Oh, I shuddered at, when I think of some of the things some of the school lunches I sent my kids off to school with and so on. So I wonder their brains are not completely addled, to be honest. But anyway, they seem to survive.
Yeah, thank goodness. Yeah, and one of the things in my coaching, I say to people, or to women straight away, is that you've got to fall in love with your own health and taking control of it, and be curious. If the doctor you're going to see doesn't ask you what you eat, isn't interested in food, well, there are more and more out there that are. So you have that power to make that choice as to who you go and see. And I think we have to understand, until the dietary guidelines change and until they move away from that dogma, we have to use our legs and use the power to make the choices. And that groundswell that is starting, I think sometimes I'm in a bit of a bubble too, because I certainly, move outside to family and friends, and there's no interest or understanding even that anything is wrong.
Yeah, we're largely preaching to the converted. I give a lot of talks, and good crowds turn up and so on, and I'm thinking, they're here basically because they believe in this stuff anyway, just to be reaffirmed and so on. So we need to get out there and talk to the especially mums, who are responsible for their kids eating, and make them realise, that a lot of this processed stuff is just terrible for them, for their kids.
Right. That's right. And a lot of the Sorry, I was going to say a lot of the mums, because they're responsible really largely for what their family eat. So, in my work, one of the biggest barriers I've seen is their husbands not really keen to get on board, not really willing to give up their pasta and their bread and all that sort of stuff, and even just not really open to understanding it. They're happy, they see their wife losing weight, they're happy with all of that, but it's still not for me. So I was actually wondering if you had any tips around, I guess, for women to help with getting their partner on board.
Yeah, look, it's very challenging, isn't it? They love their bread and their beer. They seem to be the two big issues. And as you say, pasta and rice and so on. Yeah, look, I think there's two ways of approaching it. One is obviously from the health point of view. There are a lot of men out there who are overweight and who don't see that it's a problem. And, I think that sort of beer belly that we all develop, or that abdominal obesity that particularly males develop through middle age, it's far more significant than we believe. And those fat cells, for instance, they secrete inflammatory cytokines, so they cause inflammation in your body. And we know that inflammation is one of the causes of heart disease and all sorts of different diseases. So it really is significant for their health. The problem is that it's sort of, you don't see it until it's too late, until you've already got type 2 diabetes and things like that. So, there's that sort of, yes, the logical, rational sort of approach. But as you say, most men are, think they're bulletproof and invincible. And the sad thing is that it often takes a heart attack or something like that before people are prepared to change. And why don't they change before they have the heart attack? I think I often sort of say, well, do you want to be alive? To see your grandchildren? Do you want to see go to your children's weddings and things like that? And scare tactics sometimes work. And often they'll have when a friend or a parent or someone gets sick, then that's trying to point out, well, do you want to go down that track and do you want to try something different? The other thing is providing alternatives, I think, because I think it's very hard for men to just sort of give up, everything that their standard sort of beer and pizza and pasta and rice and so on. So, things like, zucchini noodles instead of pasta and cauliflower rice instead of real rice and low carb beer. I've just found this great no carb beer.
Okay.
I should have shares in it. I keep promoting it. It's called Big Head Beer, and it's from a brewery in Burleigh Heads. And I have no financial interest in this at all. I don't even know the people, but it is no carbs. And there's a great thing on the label. It's one of the ingredients is water and barley and yeast and patience. And basically, beer is fermented, and if you ferment it for long enough, it gobbles up all the sugars. And they said they ferment a long time, and it tastes really good. So Dan Murphy's have got it in their low carb section. So, Big Head beer and things like Pure Blonde and these things are lower in carbs, but this is no carb. So I've actually started drinking beer again. It's quite nice. So things like that, giving them alternatives to what they're doing. There are some low carb breads around. So if you sort of weaning them off breads and so on, because it's very hard. I mean, so many people say to me, the one thing I couldn't give up is bread. I love bread, and bread is everywhere. It's very hard to sort of escape bread, particularly lunches and things like that. I think, packing your own lunch is a really significant step forward, because the only thing you can get usually at the local shop or whatever is a sandwich. And if you send your husband off or your partner off with a packed lunch with some, goodies from last night's dinner or, some healthy snacks, then I think that can help as well. So you can do lots of little things to help things along the way. And the other thing is, is making sure there's really nice fresh food available, as an alternative to the processed, to the pastas and things like that. So there's nice, fresh veggies and meat and fish and things like that. So yeah, look, it's not easy. Men are very stubborn. They think it's almost a badge of honour to sort of, have a beer gut and be unhealthy. But I think, if they won't do it for their own health, then they should at least do it for their families and their children. And, and so many men die young, and it's so preventable. I mean, it's just crazy.
That's right. That's right.
They're
great. They're great ideas.
They keep bashing away. Logic and also appealing to their to their responsibility as far as their kids and everything go, then I think that can be a big factor.
You mentioned, obviously the beer belly being one definite risk factor for men. Are there any other risk factors men should be aware of and women should be aware of for their partners in terms of their health?
I think, when they have a checkup, I think blood pressure and things like that is an early sign of problems. And then when they have a checkup, doctors and everyone just get obsessed about their cholesterol. But I think, if they get their sugars done, their HbA1c, that's often an indicator that they're developing early type 2 diabetes or serum insulin levels. So you ask your doctor for your fasting insulin level, which most doctors don't do. And that's an early sign of developing sort of diabetes or insulin resistance. Blood pressure is important. I think, that as soon as there's any evidence of that, that's a good sign that you're metabolically unhealthy and so on. So, they're all sort of early indicators from a medical point of view that things might be going off a little bit. I think obviously the weight. I think poor sleep, snoring and sleep apnea and so on is a sign of overweight and being metabolically unhealthy. And there are a lot of people who develop that. So that can be a bit of a trigger. That's not normal, and that's associated with obesity and developing these issues. And fatigue, sort of getting tired in the afternoon, falling asleep in front of the TV and so on. I mean, that's an indicator of, you're not as healthy as you might be and so on. So there are a few sort of, subtle sort of indicators along the way that maybe you can use to sort of prod people and get them to see their doctor, try and find a doctor who's a bit more switched on about nutrition and so on, which there are slowly more and more.
Definitely.
Unfortunately, I mean, we're not trained in that area. That's the trouble. We're all the same. We stay in our comfort zone. And for doctors, our comfort zone is treating illnesses and giving out medications and organising surgery and things like that. We're not good at nutrition. I mean, I didn't have a single lecture on nutrition or exercise in my medical course. Now, that was a long time ago, but it hasn't changed that much, so we've got to sort of change it, right? So it's, in a way, it's not the doctor's fault. They don't know to be telling people about nutrition and exercise and so on, but it'd be nice if they found out, but and some of them gradually are. I mean, we're chipping away at it all, but so if you can find a doctor or a health coach or a dietitian or a nutritionist or someone who's switched on particularly to the low carb sort of lifestyle. And you don't have to go crazy low carb. I mean, you hear of this sort of ketogenic sort of diet. So if I'm sure your listeners are aware of what a ketogenic diet is. It's really an extreme form of low carb diet, where you reduce your carbs to the point where you're running off ketones or fats as your fuel rather than carbohydrate. And that requires, really minimal carbohydrates. And people say, well, does everyone have to be on a ketogenic diet? And absolutely not. You don't have to go to that extreme. I mean, if it's where you are in the spectrum, really. So people say, what diet should everyone be on? I said, well, there's no one diet that everyone should be on because we're all different. We're all metabolically different. We all have different requirements. There's some general principles that, you try and avoid processed foods and reduce the sugars and starches and so on. But the degree you do that, I think, depends on the individual. If you've got type 2 diabetes and you're grossly overweight and you're, very unwell, yeah, sure, you'll benefit from a period certainly on a ketogenic sort of diet just to get yourself metabolically healthy. But for the majority of people, I don't think you need to go that far. And you can just reduce your carbohydrates, get on a low carbohydrate diet by avoiding these sugars and starches, and you'll start to feel a whole lot better, and you'll be metabolically healthier. So you don't have to go crazy about it, but just even if you just get people to stop having soft drinks, stop having fruit juice, and cut back on bread, place some of those things like rice with cauliflower rice and noodles with zoodles. Just simple things like that are going to make a massive difference. Don't put 3 teaspoons of sugar in your cup of tea or cup of coffee and so on. So you don't have to go crazy. It really annoys me when people say, these low carb ketogenic diets, you can't, they're not sustainable. They're not compatible with, an enjoyable life. And I mean, I eat really well. I go out, to eat at restaurants. I haven't yet to find a restaurant that I haven't been able to find something to eat. People say, what about when you go to a pizza or, Italian restaurant? I say, well, there's always a meat dish or, a nice, veal with, cream and mushrooms or something like that. I mean, you don't have to have a pasta and a pizza and so on. So, it's not hard. You've got to be a bit better organised probably. You've got to plan things a little better. But, I still really enjoy my food. I mean, every meal I have, I enjoy because it's real food. It's it's fresh food. So it's not as difficult as people make out.
That's right. I think it's the mindset more than anything else. And certainly my job as a coach is just to support women as they do make that transition. And after sort of 3 months, they're usually absolutely fine. They've got it. They've worked through all those sort of mental blocks and all that sort of stuff. And their relationship with food has never been better. No longer controls them. It's not like they get hangry and they have to think about food so much anymore. It's so freeing. And certainly for me, it's been like that. I mean, I think the ketogenic side of things has become a real marketing tool at the moment. It's certainly the latest, and it isn't a fad, as you know, but it's just that sort of word. But I think that can actually turn people off because they do think it's really complicated and you have to be really extreme. And I mean, I would call myself ketogenic mostly because I do exercise too, and I exercise in a fasted state, and I know that my body is fat adapted, but I certainly don't call myself strict in any way. I never feel deprived because you're right, there are so many substitutes out there. And
I think getting to, back to your point about women trying to get their partners or husbands to do it. I mean, I usually take the approach of, well, let's just try it for a month, because a month is not that difficult, and you can do it as Feb fast, or you can do it as a New Year's resolution, whatever. I mean, but just do it for a month, and I reckon, you'll see some differences. I mean, you'll certainly notice. You'll feel a lot better in that month. I mean, sometimes for a week or two you might feel a bit worse. That can happen, but after a month, you should be starting to see some good signs. Most men will have lost between 2 and 4 kilograms in a month. Men find it easier to lose weight than women. Yeah. I know, like,
yes,
just the reality for some reason. I mean, 99.9% of men will lose weight, will lose between half a kilogram and a kilogram a week on a low carb or ketogenic type diet. Women, it's very variable. Some will lose just as much, some will lose less than that. But for men, and it's so easy. So if in a month, they've lost 3 or 4 kilograms, they're starting to feel more energetic, they're tightening their belt a little bit more, they're sleeping better, then there's a bit of momentum and motivation. So, well, okay, we can keep this going, we can do this and we can do that. I think that's the best approach. I mean, if you tell them, well, for the rest of your life you can't have bread or something like that, well, they're going to say, well, hang on a minute, no. But if you just do it let's just try it for a month, let's just try the low-carb beer and let's try the low-carb bread and let's cut back on soft drinks and fruit juice and let's eat more real food rather than processed food, and let's have cauliflower rice with our curry rather than and zoodles with our carbonara sauce or whatever and so on. So those sort of things, not massive changes, but you'll get a very impressive result. And the thing, once you and it certainly happened with me, it was very motivating. When you get on the scales every week and you find you're losing, half a kilogram a week, that's very motivating. You think, wow, that wasn't too hard. I can do this. And, you get your few kilograms off and you start to feel so much better. And the funny thing is, people sort of say, oh, you've got to exercise to lose weight. Well, I think sometimes you've got to lose weight to exercise.
Yes,
you actually feel more like, if you do lose weight, you actually feel more like exercising. That certainly happened with me. There's less to carry around, but you feel better. You feel more energetic, so you exercise. So then you have all these other positive effects as well. So I know it sounds easy. It's not, but it's not as hard as people make out. You still... Because the trouble with diets, and I use that word, is that traditionally they're more or less starvation diets. I mean, the way to lose weight, and you can lose weight if you just reduce your calories to 600, 800 calories a day, you'll lose weight. But I defy anyone to stay on that. You're just miserable. I mean, you just become obsessed about food. You're constantly hungry, or hangry, as you mentioned, hungry and angry, and it's not sustainable. And that's why the traditional low-fat, low-calorie diets don't work. Because it's just too hard because you're hungry. Whereas the difference is that when you eat a low-carb diet and you have plenty of healthy fats and proteins, you're not hungry. So that's why it's sustainable. That's what annoys me when people say, oh, these diets are not sustainable. They actually are far more sustainable than the low-calorie diets because there's that hunger issue. So that's the key to me is hunger. And if you can reduce that hunger, you reduce that temptation to snack and to nibble and reduce your meals. As I said, I'm on 2 meals a day. I have a meal in the late morning and I have a meal in the early evening. That gives me about a 16-hour fast, if you like, between the meals, and gives the chance the body to really sort of get into a good state. And then if I do exercise, I'll exercise in that sort of fasted state in the morning, and you get double the benefits. So it's not hard. It's it's easy. Yeah.
They're great tips there, ladies. So make sure you get your husband or partner to listen to this podcast too. Fantastic tips. There was only one other last question I wanted to ask you. I'm aware that you have, together with Dr. Paul Mason, rewritten the nutrition section in the sports science textbook. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. It's about to come out in a couple of months' time. I've been the co-author of a sports medicine textbook for the last sort of 20 years or so that's sort of very widely used, and we've written Paul Mason is a very smart young doctor in Sydney. He's helped me rewrite this book with a sort of a low carb emphasis. I think we give a fairly balanced view, but we do challenge the traditional orthodoxies of medicine and the dietary guidelines and so on. So that'll be out soon for my sports medicine colleagues. And we just had and Paul and I just spoke at a conference recently in New Zealand, a sports physicians conference, and the sports doctors are starting to get it. They're starting to realise, and I think it's their athletes and their patients that are telling them that they're really benefiting from these. And I think gradually that message is getting through to doctors. People, their patients are coming to them and saying, look, and the doctor will say to them, oh, wow, you look good, you've been following my diet. And they say, well, no, actually, I've been following these low carb. I'm doing really well. The doctor goes, okay. I think in a way, you've got to educate your doctors. I mean, that sounds terrible, doesn't it? But in this area, I think a lot of people out there, through what they've read and all the sort of social media and podcasts and YouTubes and so on, actually know more about nutrition than their doctors. And it's an opportunity, if you are doing really well and you've had some significant health benefits, tell your doctor about it. And
absolutely.
They'll be a bit disbelieving to start with, but if enough people tell them, I think they'll get the message.
That's right. I saw a photo on Instagram last year at one of Stephen Finney's conferences that he did in Melbourne here. And I saw in the photo in the audience, I'm thinking, gee, I recognise that guy. And it was one of the local GPs in my area. And I said to my husband, I said, oh, look, this is so-and-so. I said, maybe he's on the low carb, because we normally go into the city to Dr. Z, who, and he's fantastic, but we're quite a long way away from him. So if we could find someone local that I could recommend as well to my clients. So my husband chuffed off to him, and he's just started to discover it, and he started to put his type 2 diabetic patients on a low carb diet. Hasn't kind of seen the benefits beyond a type 2 diabetic patient as yet, but it was fascinating. He sat there and you started educating him on all this stuff. And have you looked here? Have you read this book? Have you done that? And he was writing notes, and he was really appreciative. So I think you're right. Don't be afraid to ask your doctor about it and give it a go for 3 months. Jason Fung says that. What have you got to lose in 1, 2, 3 months? There's nothing to lose, and you pretty much guaranteed will find your health will start to turn around.
It's a lot easier. I mean, as I said, I go back to right at the start of our chat, when I told my story, I mean, I couldn't believe how easy it was. I mean, I almost felt guilty. It was just so easy. It was so enjoyable losing weight and fixing up all my metabolic issues and so on. I mean, it shouldn't be that easy, and yet it is. It was very rewarding.
Yeah, exactly. It is easy. It's just the mindset sometimes that gets in our way. And it's been so great to talk to you. It's such an honour, and our first honour email. So thank you so much for taking the time. So I'll put all the information below for the low carb beer name and your book and everything else where people can find you. So thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the Nourished Mumlife Podcast. If you enjoyed this, I would really appreciate you leaving a comment and rating the podcast, and letting anybody else know who might be interested in listening. Thanks so much.